Okay, so for this video, we will be looking at something called a for loop. Now, for loops do get a little bit more difficult, and most of the reason why for loops are difficult is because we usually nest for loops, or you will come to a bunch of exercises where you will have to nest for loops, which means that you'll have to put one for loop inside of another one. But for now, we'll just touch on the introduction to for loops. So when I first introduced while loops, I said that they were condition-controlled loops, right? Which means that there's a statement that is continuously being checked on whether it is true or not. Now, a for loop is not a condition-controlled loop, it's a count-controlled loop, which means that it's controlled by just how many times do you want to run this. So if you want to print the letter A, like say 5 times, then you will just specify a for loop that runs 5 times through itself. Now, obviously, you could do this with a while loop as well. In a while loop, you need to create a counter. So we would say counter equals to 0. And we will say while counter is less than 5. And also within our while loop, we have to continuously increase counter by 1. So we take the old counter, we add 1 to it. And this will print letter A 5 times. But there's a lot of setup. And sometimes doing things with a for loop are much easier and straightforward, and you'll see that when we get to using loops with lists. But for now, we'll just touch on the for loop that will do the same exact thing here. So the way you start a for loop, I'll just kind of jump into it and explain backwards rather than explain forwards, just because for loops are a little bit more strange. The way you start it is you say for, then you initialize variable. You just make any variable here. So for, usually you use the letter I because you're going through different indexes. So I for index. So for I in range, notice that range is green or teal, and here you put a number. So here I will say for I in range of 5. Then I put my colon, and then I'll just print the letter B just so we have some difference here. And that's it. I don't have to increase a counter, and I don't have to initialize counter. And really, in the background, this part, I in range of 5, is already doing this counter equals counter plus 1, and the pre-initialization counter equals to 0. But it's just built in. So anyway, if I run this, I'll get 5 A's and 5 B's. Cool. Okay. Now let's break down this thing right here, right? So what's really happening when you say range, so range 5, let me comment this out so we know that we're not programming. So really what happens when you put range 5 is that the computer creates a list of numbers, and the way we usually say list is with square brackets. And then the computer is like, okay, well, you want the range of 5, so I'm just going to write down numbers starting at 0, 1, 2, 3, 4, and the last number is not included. So what's going to happen as you run through this code is that this variable I, right, if you hover it, it says I is a variable and it's an integer. It will take on the role of all of these numbers one by one. So the first time through the loop, I is going to be 0, or the first number. The second time through the loop, I is going to be 1. The third time through the loop, I is going to be 2, then 3, then 4, and then when it tries to go in again, well, you're out of characters in your list, right? Your list is done, so your loop finishes. And you could see this by putting a breakpoint in here. So let's just put a breakpoint on print B. And here you'll notice that I is 0 when you hover it. When you continue, I is 1, continue again, I is 2, I is 3, I is 4, and then it goes up really. So this is, I just put a breakpoint right here before it tries to run again, but here your range is going to be 5, so it will not even print B anymore, and so it just continues. Okay, and so in this case you could also just print the variable I. So instead of printing B, we can just print I, and here it's just going to print 0, 1, 2, 3, 4, just like that, 0, 1, 2, 3, 4. Which means that if we want to do some crazy stuff here, what we can do is we can print the squares, the first 5 squares including 0, right? So if I just go I times I, if I print I times I, it's going to print 0, 1, 4, 9, and 16. So just like that. And you can do some cool things here, right? I guess cool in quotation marks, but you can definitely utilize this I in any way that you want throughout your program, throughout inside of the loop, which is one of the strengths of for loops as well. Now, this range, this function range, so here, let me just bring this back to just printing I. This range can take on more arguments. So it doesn't just have to take one number, which is number 5. We can say, for example, we can put a comma, we can say 1 through 5. And so what's going to happen here is your range, instead of starting at 0, 1, 2, 3, 4, it's going to start at 1, then it's going to go 2, 3, 4. And so in this case, it's going to print 1, 2, 3, 4, just like that. Or if I put 3 in, it's going to print 3, 4, 5. Oh, 3, 4, 3, 4. Now, there's another argument that you can pass in here. So let's just go, let's just do -1 through 5. And I can put a third number in there, and this is going to be my jump. So if I'm starting at -1, I don't want to go to 0, 1, 2, 3, 4. Let's just say I want to jump by 2. So from -1, I want to skip 0, I want to go to 1. Then I want to skip 2, I want to go to 3. So I'll just put 2 for the jumps. So here, if we run this, we have -1, 1, and 3. And to really just kind of highlight this a little bit better, I guess, a better example, I'll just say 10 here, so 0 to 10. Rerun it, and we'll get 0, 2, 4, 6, 8. So you can get creative with your ranges as well. Now, a for loop doesn't just have to take the range function, right? So when we just had range 5 and it prints 0, 1, 2, 3, 4, and I said that really what range 5 is doing is that it's just printing 0, 1, 2, 3, 4. You could just say for I in and then this list. You can just have this. And the same thing is going to happen, 0, 1, 2, 3, 4. And here, if you want the fourth number to be, I don't know, 120, you can still run this, right? Because I just takes on the role of all of the numbers in the list one by one. We'll cover lists more in either the next chapter or the chapter after that, but I think lists are quite intuitive in Python, so I will sprinkle them in here as well. And so, for example, one way that I'll sprinkle lists in is now going to a little bit more detail here. Instead of saying for I in list 0, 1, 2, 3, 4 or 0, 1, 2, 3, 120, you can now actually just put anything you want in a list. You can say Bob, you can put people's names, right? Billy, and then Beth. And so now, again, same thing's going to happen. I is just going to take on the role of all of these things in the list, and it's going to keep running through the loop until the list runs out. So here it's going to print Bob, Billy, and Beth. Just like that. Bob, Billy, Beth. Okay, just in this case, when your list is comprised of something that actually has a meaning, so for example, these are names, then all I ask is that you use appropriate variable names. So I, as an index, I would only use that for numbers if you're running through a thing X number of times. But here, because we're running through a list of names, then I'll use the variable names, and you can print it, nothing changes, but it's more, it adds meaning if I read your program and if other people read your program when you actually do programming for a living. Okay, and I guess the last part that I think is worthwhile talking about is getting the user's input to dictate how many times your for loop should run. So let me just go back to the range thing. So for I in range of, and let's just say 5 for now, but we'll change that. Okay, so say you want to create a program that prints out the first however many the user wants squares. And by squares I mean mathematical squares. So let's create this program. So we'll say when the user joins, we'll say welcome to my square calculator or something like that. I don't know. Okay, and then we'll have an input. Please enter the number of squares you are interested in. I don't know, something like that. And we will store this value in, we'll just say number. So what's going to happen is that the user is going to tell you how many squares they want you to print, right? So they can say like 10, for example, and then you will be printing, because we're talking about squares, then we'll do I times I. But if I run this now, it's just going to print the first 5 squares. Even if I type in 10, it just prints the first 5. Which means that I just have to take this variable, num, and throw it into my range. Okay, except always remember, input is a string, so we just have to convert it to an integer. So now, if I type in 10, it's going to give me the first 10 squares. The only thing here is that usually when we talk about squared numbers, we don't really talk about the 0. We usually start at 1, and ideally we would like the last number here for 10 to be 100. So what you can do in this case is, sure, you can just say num plus 1 here. That will make the last number be 100, but now we have 11 numbers here. I don't want the 0 to begin with. So what I'll do instead is, instead of doing num plus 1 up there, I will say I plus 1 times I plus 1. And in this case, we should get the right value. We're starting at 1, we're ending at 100. And just for final organization and to practice our F strings that I haven't really talked about since I showed you or mentioned them to you, is we'll use an F string here to kind of organize this. So this whole thing is a value, so we'll put that in squiggly brackets, and then I will also print I plus 1, and then let's just, for now, I'll just put a bunch of spaces here and see what's going to happen. So the left hand side is going to tell you the values, and on the right hand side tells you the squares. But you see, now when we get to 10, there's all the spacing, and so here this is a good time to do our aligning. Okay, and so the way that we format is, again, putting the semicolon or the colon, then we say how many spots we want to reserve. Let's just reserve 4, but we also want to right align that, so we'll put a greater than sign in front of the 4. And on the left hand side, let's also right align it, and we'll also reserve 4 spots. So let's see what this looks like. Okay, so this is what we get. And let's just make this actually make some sense. So ideally what we want to do is we want to print some user interface. So for example, we'll say number, then we'll have a few spaces, and we'll say square, and below that let's just print a few dashes. Let's see what this looks like. So we have our numbers, we have our squares. I mean, you can obviously adjust the spacing here, but oh, and I just realized that I had my left symbol incorrectly aligned. The alignment is first, and then is the number of things that I'm reserving. So it should be something like this. Yeah, now it's all beautifully aligned. So this is kind of, you know, decent program. And so yeah, that's it for this video.